I'm Amber McCulloch at Puget Sound ESD, Executive Director, Kindergarten to Post-Secondary in Learning, Teaching, Family Support. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are?
Yes, just working through this tech over here. So my name is Sarah Frizzell. I'm the Director of Early Warning Indicator Systems and Multi-Tiered Systems of Support at Puget Sound ESD.
And we're really excited for those of you able to join today, and for those of you maybe watching later as this is being recorded. So go ahead and keep going through. So with our time today, we wanted to just sort of orient you to the outcomes, and then we'll kind of go over where we are in this time and what we hope to do. So first outcome, gain tools and resources that serve to guide an equitable redesign to support permanent change in full partnership with students, families, and the communities in which they live.
And Amber, you might want to forward the slideshow.
I believe it's on outcome still, is that correct?
I'm just seeing the intro slide at the moment.
Okay, so that is fun because what I see on both screens is that it's on outcomes.
Okay. So, is anybody able to chat to say what screen they're seeing? Outcome slide. Okay, so I don't know what's going on with mine. That's cool. As long as everybody else can see it, that's awesome.
And it was set up to be doing auto captioning, but I am not seeing that. And it looks like when I'm sharing in Hopin, it stopped doing that. So excellent. Onward. Second outcome, explore how to create relevant and contextual learning experiences that reflect culture and community of the youth and communities who we serve. So basically with our time, we're at about 50 minutes. So we'll share the why we do this, what we mean when we talk about anti-racist social emotional learning. We'll have a poll to just orient you to think about where you are in this journey, recognizing that it is a journey. And then we will share Puget Sound ESD's anti-racist social emotional learning resource, which has a number of linked resources and tools within it, but really focusing on how to use that to facilitate change in practice by elevating community and family partnerships. And so just as we start, just naming that given where we are now, we know that current systemic practices for social emotional learning have harmed Black and Brown students, as well as many young people with a variety of identities. So really thinking about that intersectionality. And we think about how to create more racially just and humanizing school systems, it will take educators working in partnership with families and with community supports to co-design and build a humanizing and just educational system that is more equitable. So just grounding our time today in that. So to get started, like I said, we're going to do a poll just to give you an opportunity to check in about where you are on this journey. You'll see it's really short. There's 5 choices. It'll take less than a minute. So thinking about this continuum, beginning to understand anti-racist SEL, building awareness of the difference between traditional SEL and anti-racist SEL, exploration and self-reflection of anti-racist SEL practices, building shared collective understanding and acceptance and beginning implementation. So there's a link in the chat. You can just click on the link, fill that out, and Sarah will share sort of as you all do your reflection and share out, kind of where we are as we get started.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like we have 5 responses so far. We'll give it just a few more minutes as people continue to put that in. Does look like we've got about 10 responses now. We'll give it just another couple seconds there. So far, we've got about 50% of the people that are saying that they're building awareness of the differences between traditional socio-emotional learning and anti-racist socio-emotional learning practices. We've got about 27% that they're building shared collective understanding. And about 16 to 17% beginning to understand anti-racist SEL. So about 17% at the very beginning of this journey, 50% that are just building awareness around it, just a small slice that are in the exploration and self-reflection phase, and then about shared and collective understanding. And as to be expected, we don't see anybody that's in that full acceptance and beginning implementation yet. So thank you for that. All right, it looks like my slides are actually advancing now, so that's amazing. And it looks like we also have the captions on, so all coming together. So the first thing that we wanted to kind of start out with was just thinking about why do we want to do anti-racist SEL? What's the purpose of that? Why change what we might already have? And the thing is that the socio-emotional learning that's provided in absence of this anti-racist lens can really do more harm to our students than good. And that's not just for our students of color, that's for all students. And so when SEL professionals and others intentionally or unintentionally adopt a culture-blind philosophy and framework, people of color are being woefully failed and marginalized. Amber and a team of our at PSESD have done a lot of looking at the research out there and just really thinking through, what does this look like? How do we really make a more welcoming environment with the socio-emotional learning, make sure that there's space to talk about race? And so we'll go through and talk a little bit more about that. But this is why, is that we don't want to create more harm for our students, especially the students who have been historically marginalized.
So just briefly orienting to what, when we talk about anti-racist SEL, and knowing some of you have already done some of this exploration, but just kind of have this kind of shared thinking in a shared space. What's the difference in social-emotional learning definitions? And I just want to name, this is not either or, this is both and. So when we think about the ways in which we've traditionally approached social-emotional learning, so you can see that on the left. So broadly understood as a process through which individuals build awareness and skills in managing emotions, setting goals, establishing relationships, and making responsible decisions that support success in school and in life. So yes to all of those things. And what does that mean when we really approach it with that anti-racist lens that Sarah talked about in our why? So on the right, you can see anti-racist SEL takes a view that recognizes and values the diverse social and emotional skills students bring with them to the classroom. Further, it relates students' individual social and emotional struggles to their lived experience with racial injustice and social inequity. So really creating the space for students to show up as their full selves and thinking about all of the ways that social emotional learning can show up, and that we're not perpetuating white normative ways of being, especially artificially, knowing that we have diverse student bodies and we want to value every student and how they show up.
Thank you, Em.
All right, and Sarah, you are muted.
Thank you, Amber. So in the chat, I just dropped this resource from the National Equity Project. In this resource, you'll see that there's a web page there and you can kind of read through some of it, but this document that we have done a screenshot of is in there as well. It really highlights 6 different pitfalls to keep in mind when you're creating and implementing any kind of socio-emotional learning, but especially when we're starting to try to go along that journey of creating anti-racist socio-emotional learning. So we're going to highlight just a few of the pitfalls that we saw in the document that really relate to building those community partnerships as well, to really create a co-collaborative space with our communities. First slide. So the first pitfall that we that is highlighted is really thinking about the understanding and the purpose of socio-emotional learning for students of color from a deficit mindset, with a focus on developing those skills in those kids, right? That thinking that they don't really possess a result that we want to see and that something is missing from them or their families. And this creates a lot of problems with socio-emotional learning if we're trying to fix those kids because they don't have grit or our definition of grit, things like that. So to kind of flip that and avoid that that pitfall, some of the recommendations around this are to lead and teach with the understanding that all learning is socio-emotional learning for all students, to situate the initiative or the curriculum, the effort, the program in the historical, socio-political, racialized context of education for students of color and students living in poverty in the United States. And so that's just owning our history and understanding that we've been doing education the same way for a long time, and that it has historically hurt a lot of students, not only our students of color, but also our students living in poverty. And so when we're implementing these kind of programs, just making sure that there's space to be able to talk about honestly those facts from the past about how everything has come together in the past. And then finally, to locate that problem we're trying to solve with the socio-emotional learning work, not in the individual students, but in our collective response to the conditions of learning that we create for students of color and students living in poverty. So again, making sure that it's not just a standalone thing, but really incorporating that learning environment and those skills within those contexts of that historical socioeconomic piece. The second pitfall that we're going to talk about, if we could go to the next slide, is just devaluing student resistance to structures and practices that they experience, and really framing that as, oh, it's unwelcoming, it's hostile or dehumanizing, and interpreting any of that kind of resistance as non-compliance or defiance. And evidence of, oh, they just can't manage their self, that they don't have those self-management skills. And so this is another pitfall that we really encourage you to think about as you're implementing any kind of socio-emotional learning curriculum or creating, if you're thinking about the MTSS framework, what do our school-wide supports look like? How do we really kind of deconstruct those expectations? So around the recommendation, deconstruct the expectations, the cultural norms of schooling and the ways of communicating to expand that definition of success and normative behavior to include the experiences, cultural ways of knowing, and aspirations of students of color and their families. And so to be able to really do this is really where that partnering with our communities comes in, partnering with our families, making sure that their voice and their cultural norms and ways of communicating are integrated into the way that we are operating. And so it's not, again, what Amber said, it's not this or that. It's really taking what we have and just expanding that a little bit more, creating more cultural knowledge around that. So the next slide is just the third potential pitfall here is around avoiding the topic of race or leading with the assumption that only students of color need to talk about and understand race. So this is another thing that we see quite a bit in socio-emotional learning curriculums is that we're just going to talk about the skills and we're not going to talk about how it really intersects with lived experience. And so this is a huge piece that we need to be able to do in our classrooms, which is just, we have to talk about the subject of race and making sure and socio-political status and how that kind of impacts outcomes for students in the long run and how it impacts what they're learning right now. And so some of the recommendations around this piece are to leverage socio-emotional and academic development, which they call SEED in the National Equity Project. Leverage these concepts and practices to build communities of learning that talk about and reflect on the experience of race, including racialized events occurring in the present, across our country and in our communities. So, when students are they're humans just like we are, right? So when we hear about things on the news and it's really bothering us, they're bringing that into the classroom too. So allowing to have some space about these conversations is really important, not just for our students of color, but for all of our students that are involved. Another recommendation around this is just to include the building of racial literacy among all students as a critical dimension of socio-emotional learning competence. And then finally, building social awareness and empathy skills through students sharing their lived experience in their communities and schools. So again, really opening up that space to be able to talk about those types of subjects freely, not being stigmatized, and definitely not just, I'm not going to talk about this because it's uncomfortable, but giving some space around that. Amber?
Yeah, so we're doing really well on time. So we're going to do, I think we're going to insert an interactive piece in here. So Sarah had dropped the link in for this resource, the Social Emotional Learning and Equity Pitfalls and Recommendations document. We highlighted 3 because these were ones that we thought connected well to really thinking about connecting with community. But we'd invite you, we're going to maybe take just a few minutes to click on the link. It will take you to, you can find this document in all of its glory, the entirety. But why don't you just take a couple minutes to look at that, see if there's anything else that resonates with you. And it could be something that we've already talked about, but if you really want to foreground that. And could you just drop that in the chat? So again, we'll just do a quick pause, knowing we don't want to lose you as you go navigate out into the internet. But we did want to give you a chance to actually click on some of these links and like have your hands on the resource, have your eyes on it, because that is one of our goals, is that you come away having tools and resources that will help you as you engage in this work. So we'll just do a quick 2-minute pause before we keep going to give you a chance to click onto the link and find the resource. Again, love to have you drop an idea into chat, something that's coming up for you. And if you aren't on the resource but want to chat anyway, it could be something that we just shared. So as Sarah was taking us through those recommendations and how we really flip the script on how potential pitfalls and how to avoid those, maybe something that really came out for you, or something that you've already done that's worked well, or even a lesson learned. So maybe inadvertently you've seen some of those pitfalls play out in your own system. And if that's the case, how are you thinking about navigating those? So again, we know this particular platform is not designed to be super interactive in the ways that you might be used to in the platforms we've been using throughout the last year or so. But we do have chat. We do have Q&A, so we are going to fully use those.
We do have Tariq says, I think it's important to be aware, but also take action. I agree. It's about making sure that that space is communicated and that we have a shared understanding in how we're approaching the social emotional learning. I think another big piece of action is just really Amber's going to go into this a little bit next, but just thinking through how are we including, what spaces are we creating to be able to include our families and communities in this conversation. So that's another piece, another action step that you can think about.
And again, as we go through, like Sarah said, I'll be sharing another resource next. And as we're dropping these resources into the chat for you to be able to access, it's an open invitation that as we're sharing, feel free to click on those. So again, you have those in your hand. And, if something jumps out at you, we invite you to surface that in the chat. Just knowing Sarah and I are here sharing with you today to maybe initiate this conversation, but that's not saying we're the experts at this. It's really about collective expertise and community building as we endeavor to create context in which anti-racist SEL is the norm when we think about how we're approaching social emotional learning.
And Hakeem just dropped in the chat, I think it's important that we have the spaces for our students to talk because they have more access to information than before with all the technology that they have. So probably bringing up that fact that our students have a lot of access to what's going on and being able to have those conversations on all sides of the topic. So I think that's really important as well. Thank you, Hakeem. I did want to bring up, just as some of the work that Amber and I have been doing around this has really been in collaboration with many folks in our ESD. And so this was really a collaborative project, even trying to make sure that we were running all of these ideas through a collective lens to come up with these recommendations and this presentation that you're seeing today. Tariq also says something about access to many perspectives on social media. And I think that's a big piece too. I think I've seen it in some schools in our region, just talking about, I'm totally blanking on the way that they phrased it, but it was basically like technology etiquette, your internet etiquette. What does that look like? Being able to actually process some of those things that we're seeing so that we know which things are what are our websites that we're looking at that are accurate and which ones might lead us in different directions. So appreciate that. Amber?
All right. So we're going to delve a little bit more into this idea of partnering with students, families, and communities, and share another resource for doing that. So from our document, from our PSESD work that Sarah shared, what we have in there is that families and communities are key partners in anti-racist SEL efforts. So if we think about the wisdom that we all hold, we really can't do this work without partnering authentically with families and communities. And again, so it's thinking about going beyond that tokenizing, but really how do we center this work in the voices of students and communities? So this is a quote from the, I call it the Bailey framework, but we'll go a little bit more deeply into it. But this just really resonated with us as we think about coming back to our new normal. What does that look like? And, I know some of the regions might have different data. I know in our region, we definitely had students sharing about how harmful the before was. So as we think about coming back and creating a new normal, how do we not recreate those same structures that we know harm students? So again, for us, will we choose to deliver the educational experience Black, Brown, low income, and white children need and deserve? Again, that was taken from the Bailey framework. We're going to go a little bit more into that. So Sarah will be dropping the link in, and you can see it here. Building equitable learning environments, so we say Bailey, has an entire framework to do this work. So you can see here, this is just a screenshot of what the actual framework looks like. If you click on the link, you can see the full document. And it's extensive, like there is so much here. So we're just going to take a little slice, and even of that little slice, just kind of go into that a little bit. So just recognizing that, please do click on this. It's not something you'll probably be able to skim through quickly, but it is a tremendous resource for thinking about how we actually do this work. So one of the sections in this framework is family, caregiver, and community partnerships. And so they have in there co-design and organize proactive community building activities that promote positive relationships across roles and lines of difference. So families, partners, local business owners, neighbors, artists, healers, others. So really thinking about the community as a whole. There's an entire section in this. And the Bailey framework itself has 4 commitments and then a number of core practices and policies. So we're going to look at one, but just know even within this category of family, caregiver, and community partnerships, there's 4 commitments. And if you look at the entire framework, there is so much more than that. So again, encourage you to click on the link, find more. So the one commitment we're going to just kind of highlight, and again, because we thought this connected to our topic, our outcomes, and the pitfalls and recommendations documents, we're trying to create this through line. But this idea that families and school staff build meaningful relationships that foster mutual trust, understanding, and appreciation across cultures and other differences. So you'll see there's a number of core practices and policies. You'll also notice that within the resource, they have hyperlinks. And so as you're thinking about how do we approach this work, it's really complex. How do we do this? Just know that they have some further resources that you can click on, like, oh, this is how we might approach doing home visits, as the example here. So this idea of doing community learning walks. And, I've seen this done in lots of different ways. If you're familiar with Megan Bang, the learning communities work that she's done, I didn't prepare a link for that. I'm just kind of sharing it because it's come to mind, but just this idea of like a cultural asset mapping within your community, and just recognizing all the connections that are there, and the expertise that and wisdom, again, that is held by the community. So that is an idea of a practice that you can utilize to do this community partnership building. As I mentioned, home visits. So, this is when we're like, oh yeah, we do home visits. I invite you to check out the link and kind of think about what are your current practices. How might you maybe retool some of those to really center, again, students and communities, and again, the expertise that is held by all, to maybe do that in a way that builds relationships in ways that you haven't yet endeavored to do.
And I'm just want to tag on to the home visits piece. I lead an attendance and engagement network in our region. And that's a big piece of like when a student stops attending or we can't find the student, doing home visits. And there's definitely many ways of approaching that. What I would definitely suggest is not just sending a police officer to the house, really thinking through what does that look like for the family. If you try to put yourself in the situation of, I never really got along with school. That was not my place. I never felt welcomed there as an adult. And then all of a sudden the school shows up at your house to talk to you. Just really making sure that there's open communication and partnering with the community to think through what that might look like and how to make that more equitable. So that's just one piece that we've been trying to work on with the schools that I've been working with the last semester, of just not sending a armed, uniformed person to a house to try to, talk to the family. Sometimes that's not perceived in the ways that we are intending.
Thank you, Sarah. This third one, and again, this relates to many of the topics we've already talked about. This idea of creating a space for teachers, staff, and I'd argue, and students to process and determine how to engage around events that happen in the broader community. So I know we talked about this before with students' access to social media, and just knowing students come from a variety of different settings and contexts, and what might be really impacting one student could be shared, possibly not. So just being open to that and thinking about how you create space to really process that. And again, allow students to show up as their full selves and experience whatever they're experiencing and feel supported in doing that. So yeah, thinking of ways to make sure to create space. And I know I'm just thinking of in this last year when things came up, having and hearing about examples of where educators did that. So there was a plan for the day, and just realizing students were not able to come into a space where you could just continue with the plan. And so being okay, interrupting that and creating spaces to do some just shared sense making and processing and just kind of being. So encouraging that. Next bullet, intentional, professional, or volunteer programs, so paraprofessional or volunteer programs. So again, thinking about connecting back to the community in support of student learning. And last, co-design and organize proactive community building activities that promote positive relationships. And as I said before, in a way that is not tokenizing, but really thinking about authentic partnerships. Again, I feel like I'm thinking of some resources in my head that do this well. Dr. Ann Ishimaro has the book Just Schools. So if you're looking for an actual book on how do you really center this in community, that's one that I would recommend. So I'll just drop that name.
And I wanted to share also just, again, with that attendance and engagement network that I've been leading, one of the things that we've been doing is really thinking through how do we incorporate student voice into our daily process or into our decision-making processes. And I think the same goes for communities as well. So as we're thinking about how do we share power with our communities and not make it just a one and done, it's not just, oh, we talk to these people and checkbox, really trying to dig into asking them questions about how they're feeling and how they want to co-create some of these resources. And then not stopping there, but really checking for comprehension and going back through like a 6-week plan, do, study, act cycle. Okay, we've talked to some of our community members. We've got some feedback from them. Now let's integrate this and let's check for comprehension, or not comprehension, but checking that what we're doing is actually moving the dial in the way that we want it to. And so doing that continually throughout the year is another piece that I think is really important, not only with our students, but also with our communities. Who is the author? Can we put that in the chat?
Yes, Dr. Ann Ishimaro. I can drop that in right now. Apologies for the typing. Just schools. Okay, and we're going to switch our sharing up a little bit. So we're going to move away from our Google slide. I just want to take a moment to share the resource that we dropped in the chat at the very beginning, which was Antiracist Social and Emotional Learning. So again, the outcome of having tools and resources, wanted to kind of run through this document that, as Sarah mentioned, there was a team of about, say, 14 of us at Puget Sound ESD across learning, teaching, family support. So that includes K to post-secondary and early learning, who really, really passionately believe in anti-racist social emotional learning. And as Sarah said, we came together to, if you think about the poll that we dropped in about where are you in this journey, when we collectively did this, it was about what is our shared why, what is our shared what, are we talking about anti-racist social emotional learning in the same way? And this resource came about through that work. Sarah, did you want to share more on that?
Yeah, no, I think this was one of the best activities I've done in the last 15 years with a team, of just really trying to, we all live in our different silos in this work. So I do multi-tiered systems of support, and that intersects with with special education and with PBIS and all of these other initiatives. We have attendance initiatives. We have all of these different pieces that are going on. We know that we're all in silos. This activity really allowed us to kind of break down those silos and communicate what we meant exactly by anti-racist socio-emotional learning, really establishing the importance of it and how it could work into the different realms that we're kind of more experts in, right? So I think that was a really big takeaway for me, is just, when it's a shared vision and a shared goal, we can start to break down some of those silos, because this work really does live across the different divisions. It shouldn't just be put on the counselor or one person in the building.
And I would say, as a model, like we've said, this was across multiple groups, and really that idea that when we are in a school or district context, there's also multiple groups, but that anti-racist social emotional learning cuts across all of those. And how do we, in whatever context we find ourselves in, think about not having a siloed approach, but a collective approach, and having shared efforts, shared understanding. So then as we think about that journey and where we are, when we get to implementation, we're really clear on why we're doing it, what it is, and picking up those practices and policies that will allow us to create, again, systems that support anti-racist social emotional learning for more just and humanizing school systems.
Yeah, and Amber, I don't know if you want to scroll down just a little bit into the why of the anti-racist social-emotional learning, but there's 4 bullets there that really talk about understanding power, privilege, and unconscious bias. Mm-hmm. And I think that piece is really critical also as we interact with our students and our communities, that our interpretations are viewed through our lens, right? So making sure that we have an understanding of what our unconscious bias is, what our power and our privilege is, and how that really shows up when we're making those relationships. And so I think the two key pieces out of this is like building those relationships that are authentic, and then checking our biases as they're coming up, doing all of this work. Amber, did you want to go through some of the other pieces on there?
Sure. And apologies if I'm making you feel motion sick as I scroll through. It's the danger of sharing a long document. So if you saw up above, we have the why and the what. You'll notice that in this web text, there are links. So when we talk about tools and resources, all of these are the hyperlinks to learn more. So we invite you, again, to go deeper, knowing we're kind of all at different places in the journey. What's great about this, in my opinion, is that it's sort of a choose your own adventure, and you're going to be able to find a resource that supports you where you are right now, and gives you a vision to where you're moving. So invite you to explore those. We do have a section on why it matters and really thinking at all levels of the system. So this is not a teacher issue. This is not a central office issue or a school board issue or a student issue or a community issue. This is a system issue, and there is work for all of us to do to enact anti-racist social emotional learning. So definitely matters to everyone, and there are things for all of us to do. So a section for things to consider. Again, more actions that can be taken, depending on sort of where you sit in the system. And then we wrap up this document.
And I really like, sorry.
You go, Sarah.
I really love the recommended actions that you can take, and just the why it matters for the different audiences. So I know in my journey along this, there are things that I felt and I wanted to say, but I didn't have the right words. And so I feel like this document really does a good job at being able to frame some of that. So if you need talking points, if you need to be able to kind of refer people to, take them along the journey with you, I think this document does a really good job of being able to kind of frame that why, and then actually breaks down those action steps by, who you are, where you sit in the system. And so I really appreciate that piece as well. I just wanted to point out that each of these little drop-down menus under recommended actions is very specific to the role that you play in the system.
So let's go back to where we are in the journey, and then we'll do some collective sense making and reflection before we end our time today.
So this is a different poll, but the same question, just after you've kind of heard a little bit more about how we're framing things. Where do you still feel that you are at? And then if there's any resources that you would like to share or that you think would help you. Make sure that I just have that. Here, I'm going to try this. I'm not seeing anybody respond. So let me try this one. Okay, looks like we've got one response. My apologies. There's two questions in there that are the same, and I apologize. You can just answer the same for both of them. All right, and I see that some people are putting in resources, support that would be most helpful. We've got, somebody said links to resources and also White Fragility as a book study. Another person said that they're looking forward to perusing the resources provided, and they'd like more opportunities to engage in conversations with others about how they're approaching this, which is a little tricky on this platform, and I agree. This would be great to have an actual conversation about it. I'd love to hear your voices. We do have chat, so if there are things that are coming up that you'd like to drop in the chat, feel free to use that.
And with this platform, this is day one, so you may not have been into networking yet. But there is a networking tab, and it's a 5-minute little interaction. And what's a little different is that it just randomly pairs you with someone. So I plan on going in there after this. I may or may not get to be with any of you who are here. So agreed for the verbal processors. It's a little rough. But I wish there was a way to select, like to actually share with one of us specifically. Just at the end of this presentation, Sarah and I will be sharing contact information, as well as that of one of our colleagues who sits in special services and does a lot in this area as well. We welcome you at any time to follow up with us. So even if it means that that resource or that next thing you need is just talking it through with someone, we feel so strongly about the importance of this work. We'd be happy to jump into a Zoom debrief just to talk through, because we think that's part of the work, is really digging in and doing this, and it's something that we want to see for all students.
I just went ahead and dropped our contact information in the chat. It's myself, our colleague Amy, and Amber. So again, if you want to continue this conversation and have just a thought partner around what this could look like, other resources in our region, I think we can definitely do any of that. Just feel free to drop us an email.
And we have, we kind of allocated this last section of time just to give you a chance to close the loop, do some self-reflection. So as you're thinking about kind of the poll, and Sarah, do we have any more data you want to share out on the second poll?
Yeah, I definitely less people answered the poll than the first time, but it looks like we have about 50% of the folks who are kind of in that exploration phase. 30%, let me back that up. There are about 30% that are building awareness, about 40% that are in the exploration phase, and about 20% that are building shared collective understanding.
So with the few minutes,
real quick, if you want to continue to put in things that you need in the resources, feel free to use that link to the form.
I was going to say, with the few minutes we have left, please, if this is what we normally do, like open Q&A and discussion, if we could unmute you all and give you a screen to share, we would. We can't, but we can do this as to the extent possible via chat. So if there were key ideas that came out for you, please drop those in the chat. Like, what are you coming away with from this? So we started out with the goal of, again, sharing resources and really starting to have conversations about this. Do you feel like you have resources? Do you have a place to get started? What jumped out at you? What more do you want to discuss? Please drop those in the chat. Again, we have about just under 5 minutes left, so we'd love to interact to the extent possible and hear from you. So please use that chat feature to chime in. I'd love to say we see you, but we don't. I just know that there's many of you there.
And Amber, I don't know if you want to, we got a thank you from Meredith. I don't know if you want to put it on the last slide with our contact information. I can drop that in again too. Happy to share. And again, we encourage you to continue your journey on this. The fact that you're even showing up to learn more, I think, is really important for our state and our students. Again, it doesn't have to be this or that. I think that both and framework is really important for this work, and just making sure that there's space. Right.
Agreed.
Well, thank you all. It looks like, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Let's say there's lots of resources there. Again, in that anti-racist social emotional learning document that we have on PSESD's webpage, there's also a PDF. So if you want to download it, you can do that. But as you're going through the web text, there were resources that we didn't name or highlight in this session. As I mentioned, you can tell where they're hyperlinked, but just encourage you to get in there and read more, because many resources and research pieces that inform this work, and really thinking about the what for anti-racist social emotional learning. And when we started, we named that we know harm is being done if we don't approach this in an anti-racist way. And if that's something that you have a point of question on, you're like, well, I haven't heard that. Tell me more about that. Just know that there are links there that will take you to learn more about that, and really thinking about the experiences of youth in our communities, thinking about how they identify in that intersectionality. So we've been talking about race and income, but the impacts across identities.
Yeah. And anytime there's a student, our students are living with trauma as well, and asking them to relive that in a paragraph or an essay or something like that. I think that's one of the big examples that I see a lot of times, is like, it's the worst thing that's happened to you, and write about it. And it's like, but do you also have the resources to support, some counseling for that student? Or, if it's bringing things up, how do you kind of address that? So thinking through really those big impacts on not just our students of color and our students from lower socioeconomic status, but also the students that are making that to the ACEs and things like that. I think it's going to kick us out in like 2 minutes, but we'll sit here if anybody else wants to drop anything in the chat.
Again, thank you for your time. I know you guys are hopping out. And if you don't, like Sarah said, Hop-In will invite us to say goodbye. It actually won't invite us, it just we'll be forced to say goodbye. So please follow up with any questions. We'd love to hear from you. Again, I encourage you to check out the networking space in this platform and see if you can connect with others. Go verbal processors. We can do this. And again, thank you for your time. Really appreciative of you being here.